establishes. So,
Good afternoon. I'm not going to shake anybody's hand, get close to anybody. I don't think I'm contagious, but I've got a little allergy something that has my voice down and everything else. So, hi from a distance. I thought you were going to be out of town. Don't ask, huh?
They didn't want to mention.
My doctor said no.
I'm sorry, but I want you to know that I came prepared. I had my own markers in my hand, realizing that you might not be here. So you should be modestly impressed that I thought about that on my way in. So, good afternoon, everybody. As we say on many, many occasions, we know what's in the news, and we don't know what is the most important news. And I say that recognizing that if you look through history, we've missed some important news and we've gotten some of it. What I'm going to say today, some of it is simple, and then some of it is really complex. And every now and then, I feel like this job is too hard. Let me explain. I don't know if I've ever actually talked about what my job is. My job is to help you think about what's happening. I call this current events. I'm here to talk about whatever's in the news, but I try to place it in context, and I try to help us understand how it fits everything else. We have never had, in our lifetime, not in your lifetime and not in my lifetime, the kind of development that is occurring with what we commonly called ISIS. And ISIS is a problem and a half. It is a really big problem. And I'm going to try my best to describe some things about ISIS today to put it in context. I don't know that I will succeed at that. It's much easier to talk about technology advancing or to talk about the presidential election, etc. But before I get to the end of my time, I'm going to tackle some real complexity related to ISIS. So let's be prepared for that. Now, let's start with the more simple stories. Number one, Jeb Bush is bringing in a lot of money. Not a little bit of money, but apparently enough money that he is now looking like there are a lot of people with money who want him to be the Republican nominee and want him to be the president. Now, that doesn't mean that he is automatically going to win the primary or the nomination. The Tea Party Republicans believe that Jeb Bush is not conservative enough. And in some states, that's enough to keep Jeb Bush from winning that state. There's no doubt about that. And so you've got a long list of other possibilities. Mike Huckabee, who has a book called Guns, Grits, God and Gravy, I think it is. Or maybe it's God, Grits, Guns, and Gravy. But it's basically a book on how the Republicans are the ones who cherish the traditional values and the Democrats do not. It's basically an attack on President Obama, and it's his own way of describing his own conservative, truly fundamentalist conservative stances. And so you've got Mike Huckabee, you've got Scott Walker, you've got Bobby Jindal, you've got Rick Perry, you've got Rand Paul, you've got Chris Christie, you've got Marco Rubio, you've got Ben Carson, you've got Donald Trump still talking about getting into it, you've got Sarah Palin still talking about it. But as you look at this long list, it looks like Jeb Bush has the upper hand early, and a really important public statement. Let me think how to say this. Barbara Bush has recanted. She had earlier said, we've had enough Bushes in the White House. And now she's saying, maybe we ought to have one more Bush in the White House. So that's kind of interesting. But I really think, let's see, I can't believe I left him off. I really think that we're looking at Jeb Bush as the moderate Republican. And even though Scott Walker right now is the darling of the conservatives, he had a good outing in Iowa, I still think it's going to be Ted Cruz in this great big group that rises to the top. Now, for those of you who are really attentive, you're going to say, even above Rand Paul. And so right now, in my view, you've got three wings of the Republican Party. The number one wing, that is the money wing, is choosing Jeb Bush. The Tea Party conservative wing of the Republican Party, that's the one that Ted Cruz, I believe, will rise to the top in. But you've also got Scott Walker and you've got others. You've got to come up with a third title for what I'm going to call the libertarian wing, which is people who, and I'm oversimplifying, legalize marijuana, keep the government out of those kind of private decisions, but let's lower taxes and keep the government out of our money. And the person who is the one and only person in this group is Rand Paul. So Rand Paul, Jeb Bush, Ted Cruz, Scott Walker, and Rand Paul. Those are the four at the moment. And in my view, I don't think Rand Paul has a legitimate chance. The real battle is the Tea Party conservatives versus Jeb Bush among the moderates. So that's where I see it at the moment. It is interesting to see, all right, let me see if I can describe this. On the one hand, it looks like Hillary Clinton is hiding. She's not making public appearances. She's not being seen in public. She's not writing much. By the way, she did have an op-ed piece, I think in either the Washington Post or the New York Times. I read the article. Co-written with Bill Frist. Anybody remember Bill Frist? He was the Republican leader of the Senate at some point in recent history. So Hillary Clinton, the Democrat, Bill Frist, the Republican, wrote a column together arguing for the protection of and the solid support of the CHIP program, which is the Children's Health Care Program. And so you've got Bill Frist and you've got Hillary Clinton. The Tea Party Republicans would like to cut that. And so Frist is speaking kind of as a moderate, former member of the Senate, Republican in that. But Hillary Clinton is, that's all right. Hillary Clinton is kind of out of sight at the moment, and she's keeping a distance. You might argue that's a mistake. She's going to wait too long. On the other hand, in the last 2 weeks, we've learned more scandal about Chris Christie. We've learned that Scott Walker did a very bad job in answering questions in England. We learned that Jeb Bush smoked marijuana when he was in high school. and he admitted that. And so you put everything together, and maybe since Hillary Clinton is not facing a legitimate competitor on the Democratic side, maybe it's better for her to stay out of the news for a while. I don't know. There are people who are discussing that. So that's where we stand on the presidential race. And if you're beginning to think, why are we talking about this much? We are only 10 months away from the first caucus and primary. So it's not that long from now. So that's my quick comment about presidential races. Who's got a question? No questions. Okay? That's item number 1.
Yep. They'll have time to fight it out. They will.
All right. Item number 2. It looks like, and I'm not really sure that anybody knows this, but it looks like that the experts are convinced that oil is going to stay below $60 a barrel. It dropped down to about $47 a barrel briefly. I don't know what it is today, but the price of gasoline had dropped down to $1.81, and right now, in fact, I'm going to fill up on my way home, it's $2.06. So it's not at its lowest, but $2.06 per gallon is a lot lower than what I was paying 6 months ago. So gasoline and oil looks like it's going to stay low. Now, if everything I've read is right, the country that will most benefit, that's not the right word, that will most weather and even be helped by, to some extent, low oil prices is the United States. Russia is hurt, South America is hurt, other countries are hurt. We are not hurt. And so if it drops below $40 a barrel, which is a possibility according to some experts, then it's going to hurt us. But if it stays above 40 and somewhere around 60, which is what some of the experts say will happen, then that's enough to keep making money on our oil and maybe a little bit of exploration, but not much. Already, the companies that are in the business of getting oil out of the ground have cut back dramatically. And so in Texas, in Midland, in Houston, there are some effects that are somewhat negative. And I was with a guy the other day. Oh, I need to tell you all this. I have a new grandson. Friday night, my youngest son and his wife, she gave birth at about 8:15 p.m. And we've got a little grandson named Riley. So I've now got 3 grandchildren, 2 daughters and a grandson. 2 granddaughters and a grandson. Anyway, a relative of my younger son's wife is a private pilot. He flies corporate jets. And we were sitting there talking at the hospital, and he flies for oil companies, not the big ones, Exxon, but for the ones that are doing the exploration throughout Texas. He has gone from 16 days a month flying for those companies to 4 days a month. So that is a little signal that they have cut 3/4 of their travel out. And the way he said it, it's pretty clear that that's affecting their other elements of their business. That the price of oil dropping has had this kind of impact. So that's the story on oil. Any questions about oil? No questions. Y'all are not very talkative today. All right.
The Keystone Pipeline do to oil?
Let me see if I can tell you this story the best I can. His question was, what about the Keystone Pipeline? I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. Forget the politics of it. It's almost too late to have any major impact on oil. In other words, when oil was at $1.10 a barrel, the Keystone Pipeline was a smart idea. At $60 a barrel, it's not a smart idea. And so there are people who are experts in this who say that if you build the Keystone Pipeline, it will not have any major lasting impact in any direction on oil. And so my feeling is it's too late for that to be a difference maker from what I've read. That doesn't mean I'm right, but from the things that I've read, that's what I'm reading. I don't yet have an opinion on whether or not it will actually be built. But I'm going to tell you a story unrelated. This is very hard to describe if you don't know technology. Let me start with this illustration. I'm gonna give directions to my map app to take me home. So everybody listen. All right. They said, let's go. If I were in my car and moving, they would now tell me to turn left on Garland and right on 635 and then exit Greenville. This is called Waze Maps, W-A-Z-E. You've heard of Google Maps and other companies. This is Waze Maps. All right, this is very amazing, what I'm about to tell you, is that this map app, and when you hear the word app, you hear that you can buy apps for your iPhone and you can buy apps for your Android. The word app stands for application, which means software application, which means computer program, which means somebody wrote this to tell your tiny little computer what to do. Now, what this does is this app tells me how to get home. Other map apps do that. But it also tells me how fast the traffic is moving. It tells me if the traffic is stopped. If I am on a freeway and there's a wreck in front of me and the traffic is totally stopped, if I choose to, I can take a picture of the traffic and put it up on this map app. So everybody who's driving on LBJ can see, oh my goodness, let me avoid that. All right, here's why this is an important story. There was a company called Nokia. Ever heard of Nokia? Nokia spent $6 billion buying a company that was, in essence, going to put up little pieces of machinery all over the world on freeways measuring the speed of traffic. So everybody could get on the Nokia Maps app, which never was developed, I don't think, and they could know how fast the traffic was moving. They spent $6 billion. When Nokia spent the $6 billion, they had $140 billion. Before they could finish building it, Nokia sold as an entire company for under $6 billion. They lost $134 billion in value. And one reason is this app on everybody's phone did what Nokia was spending $6 billion to do for free everywhere. In other words, everybody's phone became one of those devices. And so there's a fancy word, and it is a fancy word, it is demonetized. And so Robert here has a very nice video camera. Robert, you're not going to like what I'm about to tell you. Any idea when you bought that camera? 5 years ago. The newest phones will probably take better video than his camera. And you don't have to pay extra for it. It's built in. And so everything is getting cheaper and smaller. And so the Keystone Pipeline is almost like this company that Nokia bought for $6 billion. And it was never finished because it was out of date before they could even finish it. So that's my story about Keystone Pipeline. By the way, there are a lot of stories like that. Anybody in the room know the name Mark Cuban?
Yes, yes,
He's got, I think, $2 or $3 billion. He started a company called Broadcast.com that Yahoo bought from him for a couple of $2 billion or so. And almost the week after they bought it, I'm exaggerating but not much, it was shut down. The internet had changed so much that what he had built and made billions on was just disappeared into the bigger internet system. And if you were to ask me to explain it, I could, but it's a complicated story. That was a way to listen to basketball games and other sports activities on the internet in one place, when now nobody needs that. If you want to listen to a New Orleans basketball game, if you care about basketball, it takes you 10 seconds to find it on your phone to listen to. So it's just amazing. Okay, so that's my Keystone Pipeline thing. All right, price of oil weighs that. All right, next story. Every now and then, you have to ask, does anybody ever learn anything? Let me say that again. Does anybody ever learn anything? And the answer is, there are reasons to suspect that we don't. Let me give you an example. How many of you believe that black people are inferior to white people? Don't really raise your hand on that. We used to believe that. The Confederate States of America was built on that premise. Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, actually said that black people's rightful place was as slaves. And basically, and I'm not overstating much, basically, you go all the way into the 1960s, and people were willing to say out loud in public, black people should not be given full equality with white people. A man named W.A. Criswell basically said that as the pastor of First Baptist Church of Dallas in the 1960s. And so you've got these trends where we realize we used to think this and it's no longer acceptable, and yet people cling to it. So there's a word, and it's a fancy word. The word is nullification. Martin Luther King Jr. used this word in his speech, I Have a Dream. He said, down in Alabama, with its governor, with his vicious, racist comments of interposition and nullification. He was talking about George Wallace, who had given a speech, said segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. All right. So back to Alabama, which is now a state that understands that black people are deserving of the same equal rights as white people. But you've got the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the state of Alabama named Roy Moore, who has actually stated that he wants to stand against, he wants to treat as null and void, that is the word nullification. He wants to treat as null and void the Supreme Court directive for Alabama to go ahead and have same-sex marriages. And so he's tried to stop it in Alabama, and there was a final statement given last week by the Supreme Court that said, nope, you got to do it. You got to have same-sex marriages. And Clarence Thomas, who is not in favor of those, conservative member of the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas said, it's finished. The vote is 7-2 right now on the court in favor of same-sex marriage. The days of standing against same-sex marriage are over. And I think if you were to fall asleep and wake up 20 years from now, drugs will be legalized, same-sex marriage will be everywhere. That will happen far sooner than 20 years. and the Cowboys will still have trouble winning a Super Bowl. That's the story in 20 years. All right? Hold on. Yes.
How can a judge of a state
Yeah, he's a
say
cowboy.
he can overrule it? Because it's not done, he still wants to do it.
Yeah. What she asked is, how could a state judge, in essence, overrule the federal court? And the answer is, it goes back to the exact debate that has swirled in this country since at least the 1830s, and actually before that. Nullification is not new, and the entire Confederacy was based on the premise that the federal government can't tell us what to do in our states. And so you heard the phrase for decades, states' rights. And so his argument is, it is the right of the state to decide who marries, and I disagree with the Supreme Court's rendition of which rights belong to which states. So it's a constitutional crisis. But what's happening is that Roy Moore knows that he is losing this battle in Alabama. I mean, now about half the districts or the courts in Alabama are now issuing same-sex marriage licenses. So if you're turned down in one court, you just go 20 miles to the next. So that's what's happening. But that's how he does it. He's arguing that the federal government doesn't have the right to impose marriage laws on a state. That's how he does that. All right, now let's tackle the much harder question. Here's what we know today. Yesterday, ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, which is also called ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, and the Levant is an area in that part of the world. It is also called simply IS, the Islamic State. They have been operating, ISIS, in Iraq, in Syria. This is Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And they have also now started operating in Libya. And yesterday, in Libya, there were 21 young men who were working in Libya. I don't know what their jobs were, but they were there working. They were citizens of Egypt, and they were Coptic Christians. So it's a relatively small branch of the Christian world. 21 young Egyptian citizens, Coptic Christians, were beheaded yesterday. Their heads cut off by members, fighters for the Islamic State, ISIS or ISIL or IS. Today, Egypt sent American-made warplanes, which we have sold to Egypt, and they have bombed camps and armories and locations of fighters for ISIS. It's too early to know what they hit and what damage they did, but basically, and I'm not any good at this, so I'm not going to begin to draw, but let's pretend you have, here's Egypt, and I know that it's in North Africa, and over here you've got Libya, and when Egypt attacks inside Libya, but they're not attacking Libya, they're attacking ISIS in Libya. When this barrier is broken, when the border is no longer meaningful in terms of military A going into country B, you've got a mess on your hands. Let me put it in perspective. There are a number of times where I think there were people in the United States who would have liked us. They didn't say it as widely as they did other circumstances, but they would have liked for us to bomb the drug cartel regions in Mexico. But we never did. Because you can't, is our military big enough to do that? Of course it is. Could Mexico defeat us in a war? Of course they could not. Would we have been bombing the government of Mexico? No, we would not have been. We would have been bombing regions in Mexico of the drug cartels running that place as a place of anarchy. No law except the drug law. But we didn't do that because you can't send your military across borders. There are international treaties on this. And yet, I think most people in the world are acknowledging that Egypt was within their rights to launch these attacks within Libya on ISIS. Now, here's where it gets complicated. What is the why? What is the purpose? What is the intent of these ISIS actions of beheading people like they did? Why are they doing this? And this is where I told you I've been reading. We will not be able to understand it. So I'm going to draw a parallel that's not anywhere near this kind of violent parallel, but it's an interesting parallel, and then I'll tell you why I'm drawing it. Are you aware of why conservative evangelical Christians in the United States are so utterly supportive of Israel? Do you have any idea? Let me tell you, all right, why?
My personal reason would be because that we are God's people.
Okay.
They are God's people. We need to keep out of that as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. There is a direct connection to the God question and the evangelical Christian support of Israel. Now, again, understand, I'm not drawing a parallel to the violence. I just want us to understand something. I'm going to take my best stab at this. There are a group of evangelical Christians who are called premillennialists. There is amillennialism, there is postmillennialism, there is premillennialism. And whether you know it or not, you live in the middle of the hotbed of American premillennialism, because the Dallas Theological Seminary was in essence founded by a man who was the champion of premillennialism. Yes?
He wasn't the only one.
That's right.
I went to the Bible Baptist Seminary at First Baptist Church in Fort Worth.
Okay?
Graduated from there, pre-millennial.
That's right. Premillennialism is, and I'm going to be very careful in my wording here, is the more literal reading of the Bible. I grew up in an amillennialist tradition. And amillennialism means I'm oversimplifying, all of the language in the Bible about the millennium is subjective, figurative language. It's not going to actually happen. So that's what amillennialism is. Now, within the premillennialist mindset, it is that Jesus is going to come again and set up a 1,000-year reign. He's going to reign for 1,000 years.
That's right.
And in order for that to happen, according to the Bible, one of the things that will happen before that can happen is that the temple has to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. And it's not rebuilt yet in Jerusalem. And if the Muslims ended up with full force in Jerusalem, if they were in control, then there is zero chance the temple would ever be rebuilt. Now, I don't know how you feel about all this, but the idea of thinking about international foreign policy based on interpretations of the Bible is a little, pretty big question. But that's what a lot of evangelical Christian premillennialists believe, and that's why they're so utterly supportive of Israel. All right, now kind of hold that for a minute. I'm now going to tell you that I don't know what I'm about to say. I don't understand what I'm about to say. I've only begun my reading of this. But it is true that other religions have end-of-the-world apocalyptic mindsets. This is what's going to happen when the world ends. And there is a mindset within the fundamentalist, extremist Muslim mindset that says that if we kill all the infidels, if we behead the infidels, if we behead the Christians, if we behead the Jews, if we behead the Buddhists, and let me remind you, they are equal opportunity beheaders. They will behead Christians, they will behead Jews, they will behead atheists, and I don't know if you remember this, but a number of years ago, 15, 20 years ago, when the Taliban was rising in Afghanistan, one of the things they did was destroy some Buddhist statues that had been around for many, many, many hundreds of years. They destroyed them. And so the current theory is that ISIS is gathering the Islamic State, actively beheading these people, taking a stand for Allah against the infidels in order to speed up their version of the end of times. That much I think I know. What I don't know yet, and I'll know within a couple of other sessions, is what is that version of the end of times. I'm just beginning my reading on that. So when you got a group of people motivated by the end of times and add violence to it, you've got a mess and a half. And that's exactly what's happening. And so, let me think how to say this. If you were to send an emissary to ISIS and say, we want peace, peace is a good thing to want, their view is peace goes against the will of Allah to bring about the end times. So they don't want peace. And if you think the Aggies and the Longhorns don't like each other, this is different than that. And so, consequently, the beheadings of the Coptic Christians and the beheadings of Jewish, you remember Daniel, what was Daniel's last name, the journalist? He was a Jewish journalist from a couple or 3 years ago. And the beheadings of Christians, which is this woman who recently was killed by the Islamic State. You put all that together, and they are equal opportunity beheaders. And so that's what we're talking about. This is a mess and a half. And if you say, well, what do we do about it? Let me see if I can describe this. They're not gigantic. There may be, and this is an amazing number, 30 to 50,000 actual ISIS fighters. That's it. That is well smaller than the population of Garland, Texas. So this is a very small number. But there are many other Muslims, especially Sunni Muslims, who behind the scenes applaud these people and maybe give them money. And more importantly, the number of fighters that are connected to ISIS is rising by the week. People are journeying to that part of the world and joining their cause. So, that's the best I can do at the moment on what's happening. ISIS believes they are speeding the end of the world according to their view of the end of the world, and they're doing it by the way they are beheading the infidels. Now, I'll know more about this in a couple of weeks. I'm just beginning my understanding. I have been confused as you have been through all of this. So who's got a question that I might be able to answer so far? All right, right here and then right here.
Well, you can go there first.
All right, right here first.
While you were on the oil situation a while ago, we haven't heard much lately about offshore drilling.
Yeah.
How's that going?
Okay, it sounds like a simple question. If I could get oil out of my backyard, I wouldn't want to go to the trouble of offshore drilling. And if I could get oil out of the next state over, I wouldn't want to go to the trouble of offshore drilling. What's happened in the last 5 years is that our technology has improved. You keep hearing about fracking. This is part of the fracking thing. Our technology has improved to the point that we're able to get oil out of the ground in Texas and in other parts of the United States at less cost and less danger and more convenience than building more platforms out in the ocean. The reason we're drilling for oil in the ocean is we couldn't get enough out of the ground, and we've now developed new technology to get it out of the ground, and we've done it so well that the experts are thinking that we're going to keep getting better at it, and it turns out there's more oil under our ground than we knew was there because we didn't know how to get it. So that's my answer, is that offshore drilling is too expensive when you have alternatives. And at the moment, we're not short of oil. We've got extra oil. Yes?
Where I lived in Keller, they were drilling about a mile from our addition.
Right?
And they came in and had a meeting with all of us landowners one night.
Right?
And they paid us to be able to slant drill under our property, which they never did.
They never drilled, but they paid you for the permission to drill.
Yeah.
Okay? All right? And I know this will be a shock to you, but generally when somebody wants to drill for oil, they're going to tell you it's safe. And it turns out that sometimes it isn't safe. And my comment is, we don't yet know all of the dangers of fracking. We just don't yet know. But, we'll find out. But yeah, I understand that. Okay. Robert, you had a question.
Back to ISIS and beheading.
Yes.
I noticed that our president called them Egyptian citizens. He did not call them Christians.
Okay.
And yet they were beheaded because they were Christian, not because they were Egyptian citizens.
Okay. Here's what let me tell you what he just said. He said, President Obama did not refer to them as Egyptian Christians, and that means he's not willing, this is my interpretation, he's not willing to take the religious stance he needs to take on this. I remember when President Bush avoided on purpose the word crusade after it had been used once badly. I don't know, I'll tell you, I'm a Democrat and I support President Obama. I have not looked carefully at what language he has used this week, but I will tell you that Obama is more careful about his language than I have to be. I will tell you that ISIS wants to kill Christians, But don't make the mistake that they're singling out Christians. They are equal opportunity beheaders. They'll kill, if a Jewish person is in their way, they'll behead a Jewish person. If a Christian person is in their way, they'll behead a Christian person. Get ready for this. If the wrong kind of Muslim is in their way, they will behead the wrong kind of Muslim. This is really a Sunni, Shia, most conservative, that's a terrible word, most radical part of Sunni Islam, which traces its roots ultimately to a man named Wahhab. And you've heard of Wahhabi Muslims. Well, that's the dominant Muslim group in Saudi Arabia, and that's where this comes from. Saudi Arabia would condemn this, but a lot of people in Saudi Arabia, when asked in a public opinion poll, support the actions. It's a very disturbing problem. So, but you're right, President Obama should say, here are Christians being beheaded because they're Christians, and that's not good. And that is an accurate statement from everything I can tell. The Pope has come out saying, it doesn't matter if these Christians are Catholic Christians or Protestant Christians or Coptic Christians. We now understand that there is a war against Christianity. And the Pope actually said their goal is to march on Rome, which is probably true. So, hand here and then here.
Well, back on the fracking a minute, you said, we don't know what danger it is. We've been fracking for well over 35 years.
Yeah.
Probably 50.
Yeah.
Now, it's true, something could happen tonight that was caused back then. But there's nothing we do today that we really know the final outcome of.
Yeah.
And to condemn fracking out of hand, I think is a terrible mistake.
All right, let me make two comments. Here's what he said, and he's right. We've been fracking for 35 years. To condemn fracking out of hand is not wise, but in my view, also to utterly defend fracking.
I agree.
We just don't know yet. And what we do know the following things. We know that when it is done accurately, the water and chemical push down under the surface of the land to crack open the rocks, to fracture the rocks. When it is done correctly, those chemicals do not land in the water supply. But there have been places where some of those chemicals have landed in the water supply because the human operators made mistakes. And that, if any of us could guarantee that there would never be another human mistake, then we'd be in good shape. But the question that's really is more up in the air is there is no doubt about the following items. Fracking has increased. In areas where fracking has increased, earthquakes have increased. We don't know if there is a correlation between the increase of fracking and the increase of earthquakes. That's what we don't know. We don't know if they are causing them, if they are utterly not causing them. I just think the earth has more earthquakes because it's an unsettled earth because the Cowboys aren't winning enough Super Bowls. But I don't know. But that, you're exactly right, is that if people do fracking carefully and well, it is safe, at least in the water supply, and we don't yet know about the earthquake. The problem is that when there is a human error and there's enough oil connected, the ripple effects can be bad. The Exxon Valdez, the BP Gulf disaster. Those were both human error. But because of all the oil connected, it was very costly. Now, I think all of this is moot. You give it another 15 or 20 years, and cars are going to be running on garbage. Solar energy. I mean, it's just amazing what's coming quickly. Was there a hand back here?
I just don't know what a Coptic Christian is.
I don't either, but I'm going to give my best stab at my ignorance. You know how the Roman Catholic Church is different from the Greek Orthodox Church. I think Coptic is a legacy of lineage, and it's a small group. So it's not a Baptist Christian. It's a lineage Christian. So that kind of thing. Okay, we're about out of time here. Let me think what else I was going to say today that was especially important. Give me a minute. Oh yeah. I don't yet know what the final outcome of the decision is going to be. Benjamin Netanyahu is scheduled to speak before a joint session of Congress. This is the first time since the Congress, totally separate, different party than the president. This is the first time that the presidency and both houses of Congress have been split, and the Congress invited somebody to address the joint session of Congress that did not have the blessing of the president. This is the first time that's happened since General Douglas MacArthur under President Harry Truman. Now there are more and more Democrats who are saying they are not going to attend this. Plenty of Jewish people have said this was a mistake on Netanyahu's part, and it is going to be interesting to watch what happens. John Boehner yesterday, the Speaker of the House, defended the decision again to bring him here. Throughout the presidency of other presidents, I'll give you an example. When George W. Bush was president, there were Democrats who said, I'm not going to officially and specifically criticize the foreign policy of something in process with our president. And so Democrats supported the commander-in-chief role of President Bush. This is the first time this kind of thing has happened since I was 2 years old. I was 2 when MacArthur addressed the joint sessions of Congress. I'm a little more than 2 these days. So this is quite a story. But who cares about any of that? You know what the biggest news is. Last night was the 40th anniversary of Saturday Night Live. I mean, that's the big news. And you've got an executive director here who is a musician, and I bet he enjoyed the music last night on Saturday Night Live. Thank you all. I'll see you next week, and don't shake any of my hands today because I just got something in my, I don't want to do that. See you next week. Bye-bye.